They are there. And the screen says that we're live. So we're live for the Joe and Joe Weather Show on this Wednesday, January the 8th. We're already 8 days through this month, Joe. There's only 357 days left.
Yeah, I just had to turn. I had to turn down the YouTube since it is running about 1 minute behind us. I didn't
Oh,
want
okay.
one of those
Well,
obnoxious commercials or whatever.
whose commercials?
I don't know. It always starts off with an ad or something before we go right
Well,
into
now
the.
now we must be nice to our sponsor.
Okay, all right. I understand. I'm sorry I said what I said. Okay.
Okay, we could just give like
You're the one with over 1,000, multi thousands of viewers, and me still working on trying to get that first
you're
1,000. So
getting there. What are you up to? 500?
something like that. I
Okay,
haven't.
so Joe Rayo Weather, folks, that's his YouTube channel. So you make sure if you have subscribed to mine, you are almost absolutely obligated to subscribe to Joe's. Because
Okay.
God forbid something should happen to me.
What am I, like your godparent
No, I mean,
here?
in the
I
event that
think
I am not able to fulfill my duties on the Joe and Joe Weather Show, then Joe Rayo will be fulfilling, the whole first
what
runner-up thing, whatever they used
whatever.
to do in the Bob Barker. I didn't even know I was happened to have the prices right on today, and that they call that now the Bob Barker Studios.
They when he retired or when he announced that he was leaving, they call it the Bob Barker Studio, and in his honor, at the end of every show, Drew Carey says, "Be sure to spay your cats and dogs." And
Yes.
so
Now, do you know? I have two friends of mine. They're both. One is in his mid 70s, and one is well into his 70s, almost 80. Okay. They meet every day at the local cigar place, and they hang out and they watch Let's Make a Deal. Okay, and then they watch The Price is Right. Do you know that they bet on first on Let's Make a Deal? They bet on which door is the big deal. Okay, then then they watch The Price is Right, and they bid on the showcases, and whoever gets closest to the actual retail price of their showcase, wins the bet. However, if they are the winner and they become within $500 of the price of their own showcase,
they
then the
win the
loser
money,
doubles the bet.
right?
They have this whole system worked out.
Yeah,
It's
it
just
seems
this like I'm thinking, is this where we're going 15 years from now or
I
20 years from now?
I hope not. But being in this situation where I no longer have to be somewhere, let's say in the middle or latter part of the day, I found myself, flicking around and saying, "What the heck is on at this hour that I could watch that would catch my interest or whatever?" And by the way, you can go on YouTube and see the absolute worst showcase bet. There was a game where or a show where at the very end, and Bob Barker was the host, and he had gray hair or white hair, so it was not like way back.
And I actually remember watching this when it actually
And
happened. Like,
I think that this gentleman who made the bet was a member of the military, and it was two motorcycles, and he his price was $80,000 for two motorcycles.
it must
He
have been,
originally
even Harley's collector's editions you're going to
he
get.
originally said 200. He originally said 250,000 for the two motorcycles, and Bob Barker said, "Are you sure that you want to go with that bet?" And he said he looked. He said, "Oh, well, no, 80,000."
Oh my God.
And so the
Mm,
woman who was up against him, when Bob asked, what are you betting on your showcase?" You know what he said?
$1.
$1. And the funniest part of the whole thing was when they came back out of commercial and Bob Barker said, "Oh, we have excitement here on the Price is Right." He goes to the
Exactly.
woman, he says, "You bet $1 on your showcase. The actual retail price, $28,500, a difference of $8,499." And then he goes to the guy and bet 80,000. He said, "Now, if you came closer, If
Right.
you came close, they
And clearly he didn't.
and the guy still
However,
didn't understand. He didn't look like he had a look on his face like he didn't understand why everybody was laughing. But
yeah.
he blew it. She won, and that was that.
However, we should mention that Awesome Gaming has bid on Super Chat tonight, and thank you very much for doing that. Appreciate it. Oklahoma got severe weather and then snow coming because the models are slowing down the storm for us. Yeah, I was Joe. There are parts of North Texas. Dallas, Fort Worth, I believe, has not seen snow in something like 3 years. Which I mean, they don't get a lot there,
Right.
but their average snowfall per year is not zero. It's in the mid. I think it's mid and high single digits. So not seeing a flake or an ice pellet for 3 years is that's something. But that sometimes that happens. Patterns, just because it's a statistical average means that maybe 1 year you get 15 inches and 3 years you get zero. That's
Now
just how it works.
Central Park had a trace of snow today.
Yes.
What does that bring the total up to?
Okay, so they're at 2.7, and I think that you got to get to 2.8 to make so it won't be the least snowiest season on record with 2 months to go.
Right.
Okay,
Right.
but everybody's like already thinking that we should be able to hold that
Abandoned ship.
abandoned ship to hold that number. Um, Also, by the way, there was something on Twitter that was kind of interesting, and uh, they used the fact that New York City has not had an inch and I don't know why they picked an inch and a half. Has not had an inch, a 1.5 inch individual snowfall or higher yet, and there's still time as far as getting it. It's sometime late in January would be the latest we ever got the first inch and a half. But if you look at there was a long list of years where the inch and a half of snow, came fairly late. The vast majority of them are winters where, but not all. The ones I recognized anyway. I'd have to go back and look at some of the others, but the vast majority of them, the seasons were below average in terms of snowfall. Which, when you think about it, makes a lot of sense anyway. If you're going to have above average snowfall years, most of the time it's in winters where you have it, where you've already put down a fair amount of snow in December and in you're kind of in a cold and snowy pattern for January. But you know what? It is what it is. This is what we got. So let's see what we have going forward.
I have not had to use my snowblower since the 1st of December. I have a total now of 6 inches, four and a half of which fell on December the 1st.
Uh,
I shoveled away the other inch and a half whenever that fell in December. And I actually, I think it was on New Year's Eve, I started the snowblower up just for the heck of it, to make sure that everything was not gumming up or whatever. And I'll probably do that again at the end of January if we don't have any significant snow between now and the end of January. It's
yeah,
been that for a year.
happens sometimes. There's no rule. There's nothing written that says um, thou shalt get heavy snows every winter in the I-95 corridor. I actually got about it. It wasn't quite an inch, but maybe a little just under an inch on the grassy surfaces out here overnight. And I went out last night around after we had our live stream done. I went out, took a quick ride, driving in 33 degrees, and you start to see that sheen on the road where it
Right.
stops looking wet, and you think that if it snows hard enough, it would start accumulating. We never really got into intensity. It was kind of a steady light, but it never really went to moderate here. But we still managed to able to put an inch or so on the grass. And I think I have maybe about 2.7, maybe just under 4 inches for the season. There are some spots out here that have had um, are up to about 6 or 7 for the
Mhm.
season. But generally it's it's about 3 or 4 for the season so far.
About a quarter to 10 this morning at my house. It was, I would say, moderate to maybe, if you want to call it heavy snow, but the flakes were about the size of nickels and quarters.
Right.
And they actually coated my wooden deck, and it came down hard enough so that my blacktop driveway also got a coating of snow. But the sun broke through about 15 or 20 minutes later,
And gone.
and so much for all the snow.
Right. Did you get any squalls today?
I wouldn't call what I had locally a squall. I also know that at about 10:45, my phone rang and indicated that there was a snow squall warning. In fact, I think there was a couple of them. Some people out in eastern Long Island were complaining that there was a snow squall warning, but they got absolutely nothing. But
Yeah, when I went out this morning, it was a little bit after 10, right before that. I think right before that snow squall warning went up. The sky to my west looked like it looks in the summertime in the mid afternoon when you looks like
right.
you're about to get a heavy downpour or a thunderstorm. And I got the warning, but my route kind of took me around it, so I had flakes and all, but I didn't really see anything uh, particularly heavy. So, uh, anyway,
The
uh,
cheap thrill is over.
the cheap thrill is over, and we got this quick shot of cold air that is coming through, and it is a quick shot, by the way, because it's going at this time tomorrow night when those temperatures start to settle in the 20s and low 30s. That's as low as it's going to go, and then we're going to start seeing numbers taking off. I'm going to bring up the high temperature map here for Saturday, because it does look like Saturday's going to be a spring-like day. You mentioned yesterday that some records are going to be set. These numbers are a little tough to see at home. They're kind of on the smallish side, but the darker, the orange brown, that darker orange brown, those are 60s. I mean, you've got upper 50s to around 60, pushing all the way up to Albany and all the way to Boston, and mostly low and mid 60s. You start to get to 70s in Virginia, south of Richmond, through North and South Carolina, and then you start to see some 80s pop up in coastal Georgia and throughout the state of Florida. So this for this time of year, this is a pretty solid shot of warm air, and you've got 60s pushing all the way up through Kentucky, Ohio, into western Pennsylvania, and even into parts of southwestern New York. I think that might actually set us up for some showers and thunderstorms here Saturday night.
I wouldn't doubt it. After all, if we were able to get big boomers in that cold air mass that we had about a week or 10 days ago, why not? With the balmy temperatures that we're expecting, I think low temperatures in the tri-state area, low temperatures now on Saturday night, Joe, may not get below 50, and even in the Hudson Valley.
Yeah.
And the record at Westchester Airport on Saturday, 57 in 1975. I think we'll get the bigger racer out because I think that's going to be going bye bye. The record on Sunday at Westchester Airport is 63. And the only way I think we can possibly challenge that is if the wet weather, the rainy, showery weather Sunday morning gets out of here real fast and the sun comes out and we get a nice, stiff westerly breeze. Then I think it would be possible that we might even challenge that. But regardless of whether we hit it or fall just short, this weekend is going to be a balmy weekend. And as I said, both on YouTube earlier and on Facebook, if you have, and I have, a somewhat extensive lighting display, a Christmas or holiday lighting display, I'm waiting until Saturday to take it down, putting Frosty and Santa back in the box and dragging the two reindeer up to the attic and going on the 20-foot ladder and taking the light. I'm going to do all of that on Saturday because I've known many a post Christmas season where I've had to take those lights down and those figures down in 30 degrees. It was kind of like a day like today where we had wind chills in
Yeah,
the
you don't
20s,
want to do that.
and the wind finally by 30 minutes, my fingers feel like they're made of wood.
Yeah.
So hold off, wait until Saturday, 60 degrees. I'd much prefer to do that. Although by late Saturday, sometime let's say mid or late afternoon, we may get into a couple of showers.
Convective risk starts to show up on Friday in the western Gulf states, and kind of shoots up through the middle Mississippi Valley. But SPC has been kind of on top of this for a while, and for Saturday they've got enhanced risk in East Texas, northwestern Louisiana. This is for the 24 hours ending 7. I'm sorry, this is for Friday night and Saturday. So that first frame you saw, this is for Thursday night into Friday morning. And then this frame is for Friday into Saturday morning, where they have enhanced risk in northwest Louisiana, East Texas, southwest Arkansas, slight risk going up into southern Missouri, marginal risk up into central Illinois, western Kentucky, and Tennessee. And jumping it one more day, here's the straight map from SPC on here, and I'm going to move it now to day 5. I'm sorry, day 4, which is the first day in the long range. And, this carries over from a few days ago. They've been advertising this for quite a while. But here's your risk. And this is for Saturday into Sunday morning, a 30% risk, enhanced risk across Mississippi and Alabama, slight risk that goes up into Tennessee and southern Kentucky. And there probably will be an area of marginal risk that pushes up into the Ohio Valley and eastern to Ohio and maybe western Pennsylvania. I don't know if they're going to get it to us, but I certainly think that there's the risk that this weather system that's coming for Saturday night into Sunday morning is going to bring some showers and some thunderstorms. And whether I don't know that they'll be severe, but we will see, I think, some convection out of this.
I think, as I said a little while ago on YouTube and Facebook, don't be surprised if late Saturday night, early Sunday morning, you hear a few rumbles of thunder or maybe see a flash or two of lightning. And yeah, I don't think it would be falling into the severe category. Hey, but you never know. I mean, these are just long range. I don't want to say guesses or maybe an educated guess, but as you are well aware, with especially over the summertime, with each passing day, the area of suggested convection seems to increase and seems to become more prolific or more robust. So it would not be surprising if they had, let's say, in a couple of days, outlined right up along the eastern seaboard, a broad area of just general thunderstorm coverage, and maybe even at the coastline, some enhanced activity. We'll see.
I agree, and also, looking at this, I got the surface map up from the GFS, and Johnny Quest messaged me last night. He was asking me about the fact that is this a Bermuda high? Well, if you look at it, the high is kind of just to the northeast of Bermuda. The surface high Friday night into Saturday morning. Yeah, it is. You've got a ridge that's off the southeast coast. I mean, this is just because it's January doesn't mean you can't have a big high out there. And it does look like the kind of map that you might see in late spring or early summer in terms of where the big high is off the East Coast. But that is arcing all the warm air up from the Gulf of Mexico, kind of pushing it all the way up to northern New England. And you can see that the showers and storms in the frontal boundary run from East Texas all the way up into past St. Louis to Chicago to Detroit, all in the warm air. And just on the northwest fringe of that, you've got some snow and ice on the other side in the colder air. It's a very warm pattern for the eastern half of the United States. That's just the bottom line.
No question about it. No question about it. And Saturday night and into early Sunday, places, let's say up toward, excuse me, the New York Canadian border, on into northern sections of Maine, that stretch, in the same way that you're seeing the bands of pink indicating ice and the snow, albeit narrow, but up in those areas, they too may have problems in terms of ice and snow and sleet. Again, Saturday night into early Sunday. You have to go well north, but that's where the winter weather is right now.
Right. So I've got the surface map. I just backed it up to tonight, of course. You've got this really strong northwest flow, high pressure up north of Lake Superior. The gradient is fairly tight, but we're getting close to the edge of that gradient. Meanwhile, on the other side of that, you can see all the packed isobars running up through the plains. So there's your warm air that is surging northward. You've got colder air that's coming into the northwest, and that's where your trough is. It's still out in the western part of the United States. And until we start to see that trough break down, this is what happens. And I think what we're seeing here, Joe, is probably the peak of this warm pattern. This is the weekend is where, we were talking about those teleconnections with that strongly negative PNA, the Pacific North America Index, which would dictate basically a trough in the west and a ridge in the east at the same time. And we're at extreme readings, so this is about as deep a trough as you can get in the west and about as strong a ridge as you can get to the east. And that's creating temperatures that are going to be shooting up, and weather that you might think was something that you would attach to springtime. And yeah, here's that frontal boundary Saturday night and Sunday in upstate New York. It'll be interesting to see how far south it gets in New York State. The GFS is kind of sort of vacillating back and forth about whether that line gets down to just north of Albany, does it get down to I-90, or does it stay up, say, north of Saratoga? But that's where your snow and ice is. Northern New England, particularly in northern Maine, some nice solid wintry precip there. And of course, there's your cold front that rolls through the east. And by the way, just running it back, you can see the GFS actually in those areas that are being indicated for enhanced risk of severe weather. Pretty solid development of thunderstorms in terms of what it's showing as what it believes the radar is going to look like for Friday night and for Saturday night.
Absolutely. And looking at the upper air, Joe, sorry about that, a little frog in the old throat here. Looking at the upper air beyond this weekend, it seems to me, and let's see what you think,
I'm
that
going to bring it up. Hold on. Go ahead.
that sometime around the middle of next week, we're going to begin to see more of a push from Canada, at least a part of the Northeast in terms of colder weather. That very mild air is going to begin to show signs of being depressed or suppressed, and we're going to see a little bit more in terms of the colder conditions that might begin to invade parts of, let's say, central and northern New York and central and northern New England. In other words, there's some signs that maybe there'll be a trend toward colder conditions in the Northeast sometime about the middle or maybe latter part of next week. And I think you're right. I think we're going to see the pinnacle of all of this very warm air occur this weekend,
Right.
and then gradually a relinquishing of that very balmy air to more of a seasonal pattern. Again, about maybe mid or late week next week.
Well, I've got Saturday's jet stream 500 millibar map, and the strength of the high that's off the Florida coast in the Bahamas. This is at its strongest point. And of course, the opposite side is the troughing that's dropping down in the west, and then you've got energy that's moving across the southern stream. There's no connection whatsoever to cold air that's locked up in the Arctic regions. If you look at the jet stream flow, it's kind of sloppy. I think that's maybe a good word to describe it, in that we just follow the height lines across. Your winds are blowing west to east across southern Canada, and that just kind of pins all the air up to the north, closer to the Arctic region, and not really bleeding far enough south. But yeah, I think if you go through the weekend and into next week, that upper high that's off the Florida coast starts to weaken. It doesn't completely go away, but it does start to weaken. And as we move through next week, there seems to be a repair job underway in Canada with regards to the flow there. I'm looking at the new GFS, and by the end of next week, there's this kind of weak Canadian, what I would call the Canadian connection. It's weak, but it is there. It's not there at all going this weekend, but it is starting to appear. And then the other thing I noticed too, I've been seeing this on a number of runs lately. It seems to should be showing more and more a general change in the upper pattern going into the longer range. It's not a clean change. It's not a sudden change. It's kind of a grinding, gradual change. But every run seems to want to bring it to where it gets rid of the trough in the west and starts to shift the trough more into the eastern part of the United States. The only thing I would say is, just because the pattern changes doesn't necessarily mean it's going to change into something that's going to be positive for snow lovers, because the pattern change you want and the pattern change you get may not necessarily be the same thing.
Well, we'll see. But we do agree on the fact that this weekend will be the peak of the heat, and then after about the middle or latter part of next week, we'll start seeing some form of a change as opposed to what we'll be going through over the next few days.
Yeah, I think so. What it means for the day to day, I don't know, and I couldn't begin to tell you. And even the winter is over crowd could not begin to tell you, even though the odds the odds favor winters like this. They don't always flip to something on the other extreme. You could make the case that say, well, you know what, it's been, we're in this extremely warm pattern. You would think it's probably going to have to give way to something that's on the opposite side of the equation. Well, not necessarily. It doesn't always work that way. I'm pulling up, by the way, Joe, the CFS model, the climate models for the next
Right.
6 weeks, because
Right.
they have been consistently pointing to a colder turn that never seems to come. But this was the latest run from today, and I've got the map up from January 20th to 29th, and if you'll see it on the screen here. There's some troughing in the west, but there's it's sort of a broad. This is a very broad look of what the overall pattern's going to look like, but it is a colder look overall. You do have a colder flow from Canada starting from the period from January 20th to 29th, and then for the first couple of weeks of February, actually I'm going already up to February 19th, which is the week number 6 and the last week in this stretch. It's showing a cold pattern setting up for late January and early February. It's been showing this for a while. It hasn't really changed. We're getting close to it. So at least this model, which is not the most reliable model in the world, is signaling that there is going to be a bit of a change coming.
I was just thinking to myself that we're less than a month away already. February 4th or 5th, a couple of days after Groundhog Day, will be the midpoint of winter. And
Yes,
it's coming up fast, isn't it?
they go faster every year, Joe.
David Schwartz uh, posted on my Facebook page earlier today about the fact that the GFS GFS was suggesting a big snowstorm around the 22nd, 23rd of January. Quite frankly, I don't even look that far ahead. That's 15 days out.
Yeah.
I said, you really shouldn't either. He said, well, right now it's changed. Now it looks like it's going to be more of a rainstorm than a snowstorm. But beyond 5 days, it's really nothing more than a
Well,
science
and the thing
fiction
is, it's not
fantasy.
to say that now and then have a different conversation 6 hours from now because we're going to have a new run. So now we're going to go with the new run. I don't think I agree with you. I don't really think it has it. The surface maps that it prints out really don't make any sense because it's only reflecting one point of what is probably a very wide variation in terms of what the outcomes could be, depending on where the troughs wind up, where the ridges wind up. Its snapshot look says, okay, the trough's going to look like this, so the surface low is going to look like this. But I much rather would look at it after day 7 or 8 is to kind of just look at it in the broad sense of what the upper air is doing, and then you let the details take care of themselves when you get inside to the short range. Because otherwise, it's every run of the GFS has the obligatory snowstorm in it that never happens.
Exactly.
Especially from day 10 on. It has it, and sometimes it'll have multiple snowstorms that never happen. So I would just I'd rather look at the upper air and say, okay, does it look like the trough is shifting to the east? Does it look like the ridge is in the west? Or is the ridge in the east? And is the trough going to be in the west? Is there something going on in northern Canada? Maybe brings the polar vortex down. I will tell you this. I read this somewhere today. I read it on Twitter. Someone who really is into. Oh, Steve Lapointe just hit super chat. Thank you, Stephen. Really appreciate it tonight. Thank you so much. But somebody on Twitter, I forgot her name, but as I would like to give credit, but I'm 61 years old and I don't remember. I barely remember my own name. But very big on following the polar vortex in the stratosphere. And one of the things that's going on right now is that the polar vortex in the stratosphere is very strong. And it's very strong. It's sitting up literally right over the North Pole at 10 millibars. And that has locked up, it's coupled with the lower atmosphere. And it's locked up all the cold air up there. So that seems to be the general consensus as to why we're in the pattern we're in, because it's not an El Nino, it's not a La Nina. So now the blame is going to the the low in the stratosphere. But one of the things she pointed out was that in the next week or two, that vortex may actually strengthen up there. And if it strengthens, and the strengthening is apparently coming from the bottom up, that may not be a good sign for winter weather lovers and snow lovers. It might be something that eventually causes the trough to come back into the western part of the U.S. I mean, I'm just putting this out there. I have no idea whether that's right or whether it's wrong. But there's always the chance that you get a temporary flip that lasts for a week or two, and then it goes back to the pattern that we have now.
And that's the last thing they want to hear. I know not a few people, Joe, are hoping that what you were saying a few days ago, that of a backloaded winter, saying, all right, we'll toss aside what happens up until like early February, and then let's hope for late February, March, or even early April. So they really don't want to hear that there's that prospect or possibility that the whole winter may be wiped out because of various anomalies in the upper air.
Yeah, and there's a lot of things. Last year, all the stuff that was going on in the stratosphere never coupled with the bottom part of the atmosphere. Okay, and now this year perhaps it has. That's
Right.
another thing that gets thrown out there with these. When you look at these, the Madden-Julian oscillation, which is just to kind of keep it simple. If you Google it on Wikipedia, actually, if you read that gives a fairly easy explanation as to what it is. I mean, basically, it's just about it watches wind. It's about wind patterns in the Indian Ocean and how they impact tropical storm development there and down in the southern hemisphere. And there are certain patterns or phases that these winds go into. There's 8 phases that it's been broken down to, and phases 8, 1, 2, and 3 usually mean cold and snowy in the east, and phases 4, 5, 6, and 7 mean that it's warm in the east, although I was reading today somebody saying that phase 7 is actually pretty good for snow in the Carolinas, and on and on. I mean, you can come up with all sorts of different things with all this stuff. At the end of the day, if it doesn't couple with the rest of the atmosphere, it doesn't matter, okay? So you're stuck with the pattern you're stuck in, and that's it. And you just have to wait for it to run its course, and it'll change into something else, and God only knows what it's going to change into.
Indeed.
By the
I
way,
can't add any more.
yeah, I know. David Schwartz also just said from Dr. Cohen anticipating a more significant disruption of the polar vortex, but my estimate of the January sea level pressure is 180 degrees out of phase with the pattern needed to disrupt. Well, look, it's all a mess, okay? It's always a mess. This is why for me, it's always been a better way of watching weather evolve is just to look at what's in front of me, and even in a pattern that is highly unfavorable for big snowfalls, every once in a while you do get things to time out in a certain way. And you know what, Joe? That system from yesterday, if the trough in the north over the Great Lakes were a little sharper, it would have juiced this thing up, and we probably would have wound up with a 3 to 6 or 4 to 8 inch snowfall. We probably came a lot closer to getting one than most people realize, but the 500 was just not quite right. So I'd rather take my chances with that than start worrying about, all these big phenomena that are going on at the bottom, up at 40,000 feet, and out in the Indian Ocean, and down in the Antarctic. I can't watch all that stuff.
You know as well as I that you have some winters where it will snow literally at a drop of a hat, and then there are other winters, and maybe yesterday is an example where it's kind of like you're trying to play with a toy, but the toy has a couple of bad batteries in it, and it just doesn't go the way it's supposed to go. Sometimes things just don't work out, and sometimes you get disappointed.
Yeah.
I know that winter of 72, 73, where Central Park had only 2.8 inches, was just such a winter of disappointment. I mean, there was at least, I think, like half a dozen scenarios that winter that could have been, should have been, would have been a significant snowfall for
And
the
was
tri
it?
area, and never was. So
Tyler Thompson says, have we had a similar winter such as this? what was the most similar pattern we've had. Actually, Tyler, if you go back and look at any of a number of winters in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, that's kind of like what this is. And Joe and I lived through a lot of those. Am I right? But
Absolutely.
particularly in that list that I saw, there were a number of the winters in the 80s were in that list that matched that. I mean, you're using a one parameter here where you're talking about an inch and a half at one particular point in New York City. But in terms of winters like this, and if you look at the upper air, I actually, by the way, I had that tool, that map. Did I put it away? I think I might have put it away, but no, wait, here it is. Hang on one second. You're gonna briefly disappear from the screen and then reappear.
Well, I can
But
disappear like that.
yes, thank you. But I went to, I was reading about 1914, 1915, and January 1915. We went from like January, I think it was January 9th to maybe it was January 3rd to February 9th, where it was a really, really warm pattern. There was barely an inch of snow during that period. And I was looking at some of the upper airs with that in that stretch. And you know what? Looked very much like what we had. I'm just going to run it through a little bit here. But if you look at this in terms of the upper air, guess where the trough is? It's in the west.
Dare I say that Mr. Chiaffi is now resorting to analog forecasting?
Well, you could dare say it, but he's asking me about he was asking me about
Similarity.
something similarity,
Yeah.
and yeah. So here, starting from this period in mid-January, and this is back in 1915. Your trough is in the west. Okay, if you look at the way the upper air sets up, ridge in the east, trough in the west. There is. I didn't even bring it up to the front of the screen, but I'm going to bring it up right now. But this is, the colored lines in the back. I mean, that's the upper air back in this is January 15th, 1915. And your cold air is locked up. If you see where the purple is north of Alaska, there's your polar vortex. That isn't that different from if I go to the GFS. Let's just go to the GFS upper air. I mean, it's not identical, but the overall idea where your Arctic air is pretty much cut off and your flow is coming in straight from the Pacific because of a deep trough in the west. I mean, this is what you have for Thursday, and then just going back to the way it was. So these patterns happen from time to time, and they have outcomes where everybody is going to start saying that, oh my God, it's never. Every year they say the same thing, Joe. Have you noticed? Every year it's never happened before that we've gotten warm in the winter during the winter months. It's never gone to 50 before. It's never gone to 40 before. It's never gone to 60 before. It happens almost every single winter. Attention, everybody. It's happened before. It's going to happen again.
1914, 1915 at Central Park was most definitely what you would describe, Joe, as a backloaded winter. 2.6 inches of snow at Central Park in December, 3.8 in January, 4.5 in February, but then in March, 7.7, and there had to be some kind of a major storm. I think that was the one that we were talking about that happened around Easter, early in April.
Right.
10.2 inches in April, making for a total of 28.8, which actually falls.
It's right at normal.
With just slightly below the normal over the last 30 years or so, but still, if you want your snow, and if this is indeed a pattern that continues through the rest of the winter, then maybe, just maybe, you'll get all your snow in the second half of the winter as opposed to the first half.
Well, there's a long way to go.
Maybe not.
I'll let the pattern do what the pattern's going to do, and I'll forecast whatever I'm supposed to forecast based on what's going on. And I'm not going to, kind of waste too much energy over the fact that, the pattern's going to change on January 20th versus January 22nd or January 25th. Or who knows? Maybe it doesn't change at all. I don't know. Do any of us know really where it's going to go? That's the
No,
fun of what we do.
right. I said, in fact, I once said in a magazine article, if you think about it, that when you watch your whatever newscast you watch on whatever station you watch, that the meteorologist or the weather anchor is the only one night after night after night that foretells the future. None of the other the newscasters just tell you what happened today or what led into what happened today. Occasionally, a sportscaster will make a prediction on a big event like the Super Bowl or the World Series, but we're the only ones who come on television every single night and try to predict the future, try to
Right.
forecast what's gonna happen.
Yeah, I read a piece today. I seem to have read a lot today for some reason, but I read a piece today. Somebody was kind of trying to explain, uh, the whole idea when it comes to the old jokes with weather forecasting. And the fact is that forecasts have gotten a lot better in the last 10 or 15 years. And I don't think you'll disagree with that. In general,
Right.
I think they have gotten quite well. But what was interesting about the article is what I mentioned earlier. People's memory spans are very short. And they don't really, since the vast majority of the time the weather is relatively uneventful, it doesn't have a big impact on their lives. So they're not going to make a note of the fact that, oh, they forecasted a sunny day and it was a sunny day. But if something happens where they forecast something that winds up being something else, that's what winds up sticking in your mind.
Right.
So, and those things actually don't happen very often. Where and plus the fact that you're forecasting over a wide geographic zone, but the person made the point about it's a lot of the selective memory of it all, and then you take that and extend it out to a press that openly feeds into it. Everything is, it leaves you with the impression that anything that's ever happened in weather has never happened before. A 1-inch snowstorm now becomes a crippling experience, which it really should not be. It's very, you and I find that both extremely frustrating to deal with.
Yeah. If you look back on some of the old, let's say 30 or 40 years ago newscasts, let's say when it was Walter Cronkite and Tom Brokaw, for example, you rarely ever saw in those newscasts weather impact or make an impact in the news, even during the harshest winter storm. Sometimes, even I remember during the blizzard of '78, it was almost like near the end of the newscast where they mentioned or they talked about that.
Right.
Uh, and now, if tonight, for example, I was watching on ABC with David Muir. I mean, one of the top stories leading off was not so much what was going on in Iran or anything, but the storm that we just mentioned, the future impact of that storm that will take place and sweep that system
Well,
all the way up into the
Joe,
some eastern states.
at the network levels now, they have there's a whole bureaucracy. Not only do you have, are you still there?
Yeah, I'm
Okay,
here.
I'm sorry, no, because I'm looking at you on the delayed and on, on the real time. No, the networks now have whole departments. They not just have weather department people that are producing weather, but they have a management bureaucracy of a weather department, weather producers and executive producers whose sole jobs now are to go out to places around the country and around the world where weather is going on and make it part of the newscast. That didn't exist back when we started, and even actually probably is only something that has evolved in the last 10 years. And here's another thing. I'll just answer. Vito Spano asked really quick: are we in an El Nino winter? No, we're not. There's no El Nino. There's no La Nina. There's nothing. The ocean water temperatures are slightly warmer than normal out in the Pacific, but according to the Weather Service, there's nothing. It's a la nada. But back to my point, which I've now forgot what I. Oh, so this is here's another thing, and this is I would just without taking a position on this. So you weren't the night you weren't you weren't on Monday. We looked at Australia because of all the wildfires. Okay, so I pulled up the temperature anomaly map, and what struck me right off the bat was what I was hearing in terms of the news coverage of what was coming out of Australia with the wildfires, that this was all climate change induced. Okay, and I'm looking at the anomalies, and I'm seeing what the temperatures are in the inland parts of Australia, which are up at 40 to 45 degrees Celsius every day. But when you look at the anomalies, they really weren't anything, it's not like those temperatures were running 15 or 20 or 10 or even 5 degrees above average. They were about where they're supposed to be. So I thought, well, okay, well, how can it be climate change if it's hot? It's the beginning of summer in Australia and it's hot. This is not exactly breaking news. And then what's been coming out the last several days now is the fact that these fires have all been, a lot of them were arson. These wildfires that they were started by who knows. So this is where I get upset, because why didn't those reporters do their job in finding out what the cause of the fire was, instead of, because they're lazy, because that's what they are. They're lazy. All right. Lazy. You can look that up and use a thesaurus to find out maybe another word for lazy. But it's easy to just kind of say, all right, let's go, fire. Let's look it up on the files, the cross files. You know what I'm thinking? You know where I'm going with this? So hit fire, column 1, fire, column 2, wildfire, forestry, column 3, causes, climate change. There were fires, they were wildfires, and they are caused by climate change. That's what comes out, and that's the thing that really gets me. That's where they go without even doing their jobs as journalists to find out what the real cause is.
Well, Jim Witt, who we've mentioned on this channel before, he puts out a calendar which helps to raise money for various children foundations each year, a long-range calendar. In a discussion with him once, he told me that he believes that because of the fact that everybody carries a phone with them now, that if a thunderstorm or a funnel cloud or a tornado breaks out, immediately you see that person pull out the phone and take video footage of it, and it immediately goes on social media or on your local television station.
Right.
This is something that did not happen 20, 30, 40 years ago, but now with this proliferation of video, being able to show you all of this stuff, Jim said it now gives the general public the impression that weather is a lot worse now than it was 20 or 30, 40 years ago.
It just wasn't reported 20 or 30 or 40 years ago, or you didn't have access to the information. It was reported, but who knew? When something happened in Iowa, or when something happened in Montana, when something happened in North Dakota, if you looked at it, and if your source was the newspaper, it was probably in a small little box on page 57 in the New York Times somewhere.
Right.
I'm getting worked up. And no, William Huber, I was not going to close the bowling alley down last night. Just so you know, that was not my intention.
I like to look back on old newspaper articles about weather. And during the big storm of 1947, December of 47, which dropped 26.5 inches of snow in New York City, which at that time was the all-time record for any snowstorm. One thing I noticed in reading all the stories was there was a plethora of different stories about big snows, not just in other parts of the country, but in other parts of the world. And I'm saying to myself, these stories about a big snowstorm, let's say in Europe, or the big snow that hit the Cascades in Washington, these stories would probably have never made the newspaper back then if it weren't for the fact that everybody was zeroed in on the 47 big storm, and now these were augmenting,
right,
adding on to that stories, all these other places that were getting hit with storm. Otherwise, if New York hadn't gotten that big storm in 47, I doubt very much if you would have seen the story in the New York Times about the big storm that was hitting the Cascades, or the snow that dropped X number of inches in Italy, or Lisbon, Portugal, or whatever. It was just that, hey, we got a big storm. Let's find as many other places that are having the same thing all around the world. So even back then, the news media was tilted in such a way that they were trying to make something more than what was really
Oh
happening.
yeah, and it's just so annoying. It's that's why I just kind of want to just do what I like, and that's just do for the forecast stuff. I don't want to get involved in all this other, all this other nonsense that goes on.
And the Weather Service and the National Weather Service now, NOAA, they must have some kind of thing on their computers where they can tell, when they show you, for example, areas of possible severe weather due to thunderstorms, they can now also tell you almost to the very last number how many millions of people are going to be involved. So now instead of just simply saying, you know, Florida and the Panhandle and parts of the Deep South are going to be seeing. Now all of a sudden it's like 21 million people are going to be affected by this. This is a new thing now to give you now a numerical figure as to just how many people may experience severe weather in the form of thunderstorms or tornadoes.
Yeah, because it's all about ratings.
Right.
What little ratings they get, because their audience size is nowhere near what it was 10 years ago or 20 years ago or 30 years ago. They still seem to function, a lot of these places, as if they're the only game in town. And I got news for you. Most people are watching, Netflix or Amazon or some movie, or they're playing games, or they're doing any one of 100 other things than watching, you know, this channel or that channel, or the old legacy networks, ABC, CBS, NBC. Those days are long gone.
Well, they discovered the news people, the people in the various corporations, the hierarchy, as you mentioned a while ago in this cast that we're doing right now. They discovered what you and I, and everybody who's on our board right now, or most everybody, knew many many years ago, that weather drives your
Right.
typical newscast. It is weather that gets people hooked. It's weather that everybody turns on the news for. It is not necessarily, I mean, like a major story like today with Iran. That is, of course, an important story and everything. But typically, if it's Tuesday or Wednesday and you want to know if it's going to be nice and bright and sunny for your barbecue with the 40 people coming over to your house on Sunday, you tune in because you want to find out what the weather is going to be. And this is why the weather now is virtually in every block. It's at the top of the newscast. It's 10 minutes after, a little brief tease. 20 minutes after is the full weathercast. This is what drives your newscast
But
now.
you know what? But Joe, they've perverted the product. They perverted the coverage, because you're almost as if you're obligated to make something sound much more than it is,
Right,
even on a nice day.
right.
I mean, I've never been told this, but I'd be curious, as uh, in other places, whether people have been told, hey, you should say this instead of saying that. Can you play this up? Can you
I've
tone
heard
this
that.
down?
I've heard
I mean, I never was that I could, even in a subtle way. I never was really asked to do that. But
it never happened with me. And in fact, my news director for 21 years, Janine Rose, one of the nicest people, an atypical news director, and she knew. She told me once. She said, "Joe, I don't know anything about weather. You're our weather expert. You tell us. You did." And she did. She didn't. She didn't care what the other stations were saying. She left it all on me. Now, on the other hand, and I'm not going to mention his name, but we had an assistant news director, and it was on the morning when we were having. It was the morning before Hurricane Irene, and I'm there. It was on a Saturday. I was called in to do Saturday coverage. I'm on like 7 o'clock in the morning, and people are talking about Irene and talking about what's going to happen with the flood. And I gave a little pep talk. I said, "Look, we've been through this before. We're going to get through this. Don't worry about it. We're here. We're going to hold on to your hands, so to speak, and we're going to give you all the coverage and all the information. So stay with us right here at News 12." 2 seconds after I had said, "You'll be here at News 12," the assistant news director came in and started screaming at me. And he said, "We didn't hire you to be a cheerleader. We hired you to tell what the weather's going to be, yeah, and that was a totally wasted
But
newscast, you know. But there are people out there who are really, really, what's going to
But
happen?
I always, I always kind of took the same approach because I wanted to avoid, stories that were going to be written um, with an out of control angle to them.
Right,
Okay,
right,
where look, the people that write news stories are writing news stories. They're writing them for those of you at home who don't know how this works. I mean, they're reading something that's written by Associated Press. So they take it and then they just kind of reword it a little bit and make it newscaster friendly. Okay. So you don't have weather people in those news stations. Weather people are not writing weather copy. They're being written by people in the newsroom, and sometimes they'll say things that are just ridiculous and make absolutely no sense. Or they'll write about a weather event that happened yesterday as if it's still happening today or about to happen tomorrow when it's already happened. So you're trying to avoid these mistakes. And I many times, I just to avoid problems in in upcoming snows where snow was about to happen and it was going to be a snowstorm. I had to go into the newsroom once several times to keep because have kept people asking me after I had told them that the snow wasn't going to start until about 10:15 in the evening. We were going to go from rain to heavy snow between the newscast from 10 o'clock to 11 o'clock. And I told them this at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And Joe, every hour, someone different kept coming in and saying to me, it's still raining out. And I would have to say yes, because if you remember what I said in the meeting, I said that it would rain until about between 10 and 11 o'clock. While we were on the air, it would change over to snow. And I finally had to go. I was so angry by the time we got to about 7 or 8 o'clock because so many people who were at that meeting that I said this clearly were not listening. I went back into the newsroom and I just said, I just kind of said, hey, everybody, I'm only going to say this one more time. Please stop coming back and asking me. It's raining now. It's supposed to be raining now. It will be snowing at 10:15. Okay? Between 10 and 11 o'clock. Sure enough, at 10:15, I was watching the lamppost. It changed over. But this is the kind of thing that we had to fight against professionally.
right.
And after a while, I mean, I know in my later years, later years in television, I didn't care anymore. It's like, you know what? If you want to write something that's totally fiction, go ahead. I can't be bothered. I lost all interest.
20 years ago, I was at a conference of the American Meteorological Society, and one of the people who gave a talk was Harvey Leonard. And if you're from the Boston area, Harvey Leonard has been on for decades now. He is probably the most highly regarded weather forecaster since the days of Don Kent. Don Kent was like the Frank Field of weather in Boston back in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. But Harvey told a story about how there was an impending big storm coming, and he was waiting on the new forecast data at 11 o'clock that was coming in to his weather center. And all of a sudden, the executive producer told him, we decided we're going to put you outside somewhere where it was like 20 degrees. It was very, very cold that night in advance of the storm. And Harvey said, if you put me outside, then I won't be able to convey to all of our viewers the latest information on how much snow we're going to get and all the data and thing. He said, I'll be out there freezing. And the executive producer told Harvey, he said, I'd rather have them see you out there freezing as opposed to being in your nice warm weather center. We have reporters out there. We want to put you out there too. And so he was unable to do what an Alan Casper, for example, and give you the very latest off the teletype information or off the fax machine information because some executive producer decided, hey, let's put the weatherman outside and see him freeze as opposed to giving our viewers the latest information. And that's the way, not all, but some producers or news directors or supervisors in at various TV stations. That's the mindset of some of them.
Kenneth Simmons, thank you so much for hitting Super Chat tonight. Joe and I really appreciate it. Thank you. Also, I don't know what's going on the chat board because I'm seeing a few people, the moderators are working overtime tonight. Folks, can we kind of keep it clean and non-political. I mean, stay on topic. It's fine, but cuss words and stuff like that. Let's back off from that, okay? Um, Daddy has spoken. Okay? Just so we're clear. Yeah, I was thinking, just remembering about the blizzard of '96 because I was by myself for a while. And I was on the air for almost 36 hours straight. And in that first 8 hours, I went from inside studio. I actually asked to go outside to do a couple of shots outside, just as a change of pace. Then Norm Davoskin came in, so that he helped out considerably, and Neil Avignano, I think, also came in. Remember Neil?
Neil Evans, yeah.
Yes.
I haven't heard that name in a while.
He came in and helped out. But at least at that time in 1990, on the blizzard of '96, I think I had far more control over what went on the air from the standpoint of weather and what everybody else was doing in terms of feeding into that. Today, I don't think that exists. I just don't. I think there's this sort of formulated, these stations have this sort of formulated idea of what the coverage is supposed to be. We're forecasting an inch of snow, so let's make sure uh, uh, we make it sound horrible enough so that schools are closed and all thing. Everybody just gets out of control. I don't know. That I think is one of the things I'm happy about, that I'm not doing television anymore. That I don't have to get involved in that sort of nonsense.
All right. Well, I tell you what, Joe. It's past 8 o'clock.
Oh, you got Jeopardy, don't you?
Yes, Jeopardy.
Run.
It's a very funny quick story. I told this on YouTube and Facebook earlier. The second round, because they're doing two games, one in the first 8 to 8:30 and then 8:30 to 9 o'clock. And in the second round, the final Jeopardy category or question was astronomers. And literally right before they started the bridge music, the 30-second music, the phone rang. It was my sister, and she said, as the question came up on the screen, he said, "All right, what's the answer?" Because she knew I knew, and it was about who was the only astronomer whose remains were flown or sent to the moon, and it was Eugene Shoemaker. Actually, Alex Trebek called him Schumacher. It was Shoemaker, and I ought to know because I met Shoemaker's wife Carolyn about 20 years ago at a function here in the Hudson Valley. So if Alex Trebek somehow or other is watching us instead of watching the television right now, the televised version of the second round of the championship round of Jeopardy champions, Mr. Trebek, it was Shoemaker, not Schumacher.
Right, correct. All right, just want to say real quick, Javon Perry, thanks for hitting Super Chat tonight. Appreciated. Where is he? Johnny Quest, you asking about the Superstorm of '93. Well, we're running out of time tonight, so we'll take care of that tomorrow.
Defer that tomorrow. Hey, thank you, Scott. Scott Briller, Joe, Jeopardy. Who are the two best meteorologists on YouTube?
Was that a double Jeopardy?
Double Jeopardy, or maybe Final Jeopardy, since we're going to be closing it down very quickly.
But
who are the two best meteorologists on YouTube?
That's very nice. Thank you, Scott. Appreciate it very much. Tim Tuguska, you're on the board tonight. Austin Belkoski, are there maps to look at for the ice storms? I'll tell you what, guys, just kind of message me or email me somewhere. Javon Perry hitting Super Chat again. Thank you very much. Because we're running out of time. But if you message me on Facebook or shoot me an email, which you can get my email addresses on my Facebook page, I can send you links. Or if you're on Patreon, send me the message through Patreon, and I'll send you the links that way. David Silverstein now that's hitting Super Chat. Thank you very much. Really appreciate it. You sure you want to go, Joe?
Keep it going tomorrow night, folks.
All right. So, everybody, behave yourselves. Thanks for being here. We'll see you tomorrow. Good night, everyone.
Night.